Shalom, everyone. Welcome one more time to NETIV. And this is Wednesday night. And since it's Wednesday night, we're going to be covering some different material. We're always covering different material. They told me I couldn't teach the Torah, so I've been teaching around it. But tonight is going to be, well, it's going to require some thinking. You know, Genesis is the seed plot of the Bible. Everything began from there. And there are several things that bothered me because, well, first off, the snake, the serpent, Nahash, after the Garden of Eden, when do you hear about it? And the other one was in Genesis chapter 1, we talk about a serpent or about a Leviathan. When do we hear about the Leviathan? And it's still alive according to the scriptures that we read. So where's the Leviathan? And why does God keep it alive? And so tonight I want to try to tie in those with the second set of tablets, because we talked last time about the tablets themselves, the 10 commandments on the two tablets, and the fact that Moses, when he came down from the mountain with the two tablets in his hand that were bigger than you would imagine and weighed more than you would imagine, because they were 6 cubits by 6 cubits, which would be taller than he was. And they would also be 3 cubits wide. So it was extremely heavy since it was made out of sapphire stone. So the first set of tablets, God must have been actually carrying them or carrying them for him. But once he reached the bottom, the tablets were broken, and we had to wait as he went through the process of a second term going back. So anyway, we've talked last week about the first set of tablets and a lot of the story of creation. Now, this time I want to talk about the second set of tablets, which is found in the book of Deuteronomy. But before we get there, though, I want to go back and remind ourselves of those two creatures that are mentioned in the Genesis chapters, but seem to be lost after that. Well, I should preface that with the fact that Leviathan is spoken of all the way up into the book of Psalms. But again, it is lost in history. So as we go through this, I want to talk about the two animals. And there's a mystical connection between the Nahash, the serpent, and the Leviathan, and the original stories that go with it. So we're going to talk about all of those kinds of things because they tie in with the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, the first set of tablets, remember, were lost because of the worship of the golden calf. In this one, I want to go back to the Nahash in the garden, because I want us to understand it's not just simply a creature, but it's also a metaphor. You see, the Nahash represents a distortion in what's called divine wisdom. If you remember in Genesis chapter 3, verse 6, it reads, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to her eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one, and the Hebrew word is sakal, which is the word for wisdom, but it's not divine wisdom. Sakal is different. Now she took from its fruit, or took its fruit, and she ate, and then she gave it to her husband who was with her, who was not far away, and he ate. Now, this kind of wisdom, sakal, then, it's not divine wisdom. So what did she actually get? Well, as the Hebrew understands it, it deals with prudence. It deals with circumspecting, and it's to be wisely understood. It is not divine understanding. Now, in contrast, the messianic redemption, the return of the primal Torah, that's the Torah of the tree of life, that tree which was in the center of the garden. So Nahash appears here, and he brings to them a form of wisdom. Now, in the garden, it was not just about offering Eve the fruit that would make her wise. The question is, what kind of fruit was it? Now, there's lots of understandings of what kind of fruit it was, but I want to think in terms of the fact that this fruit is really not told to us on purpose, because really the fruit is the fruit of the tree of good and evil, and we don't know what that tree was or what kind of fruit it had on it. Now, it was known in Hebrew as Da'at Tov Bara. So this knowledge of good and evil, which suggests some sort of moral, well, accountability in some sense, the ability to define right and wrong for oneself rather than relying on divine instructions. So we determine what's right and wrong, which we know right now today leads us in lots of different ways. It begins in Genesis 3:5, previous verse. For God knows that on the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like Elohim, knowing good and evil. But knowing good and evil is not giving us eternal life. It just means that we have a wisdom about us. So before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve existed in a state that we would call it pure divine consciousness, completely aligned with God's will. But after eating the fruit, well, they gained self-awareness, moral ambiguity, the ability to make independent ethical choices, but at the cost of separation from divine clarity. You see, the clarity that they had was based upon themselves. The Nahash was essentially suggesting that Eve should pursue self-determined wisdom instead of remaining in a state of pure divine dependence. Now, in the Kabbalah, wisdom includes divine intuition, while Binah, understanding, represents a structure or a processed knowledge. In other words, when we learn, we process knowledge, and we begin to use that to build our understanding of various concepts. Well, the Nahash may have been tempting Eve with the overemphasis on Binah and skipping Hokmah, which is that divine wisdom. Quite a different experience. Now, the serpent is also associated with the Sitra Achra. The word Sitra Achra simply means the other side. The other side of what? Well, it's the other side of good. It's the idea, and I guess good may not be a good enough word to use. It simply talks about the distortion of wisdom. And this distorted wisdom builds what I call a klipot, a husk around your heart, around your ability to understand with emotion. It's a metaphor for spiritual descent into this world where divine light, the light of the first day of creation, is just obscured. It's not there because remember, God creates on the fourth day sun, moon, and stars. So he took away the first light and gave us the second light. So the light of the sun, moon, and stars were a part of paradise, but they were not a part of the original light that was created. Now, in some esoteric traditions, the Nahash is not simply seen as purely evil, but as an initiator leading us into a deeper understanding of reality. Though, in a way, that bypasses divine timing. The Zohar indicates that Adam and Eve would have received this knowledge in a holier manner eventually, but they sought it too soon. According to the writings, they would have received this holy understanding, this wisdom, had they waited till the end of the Sabbath. On the first day of the week, God would have given them their understanding, but they couldn't wait. So the serpent was offering a shortcut, is what it amounts to. But it was wisdom without a proper vessel, I guess is another way of putting it. It brought not the end, but it brought destruction instead. Now, Nahash tempted Eve with moral independence, with self-awareness, and with the power to shape her own destiny. But it was a wisdom gained far too soon and without proper meaning. It was wisdom of good and evil, but without the divine clarity to navigate it correctly. In many ways, human history is the process of rectifying this mistake, learning to wield knowledge without holiness rather than through the distorted lens of the serpent. Nahash's deception wasn't just in offering something false, it was in misrepresenting the nature of wisdom altogether. Instead of leading humanity to a true divine wisdom is called Hokmah Iliano. It led to a lower, fragmented form of knowledge that requires rectification over time. You and I both know we learn things all the way through our lives. And sometimes as we learn them, we find out that they're not quite right. And so we oftentimes have ourselves replacing that, putting in its place our new understanding. But if we do that, we still have to understand that doesn't mean that that's going to be the right answer either. Science right now, we live with the idea that the creation began with the Big Bang. Well, science is learning through the what we would call most recent understandings that may not be exactly how it happened. But again, we learn, we unlearn, we relearn. The process that we are in now is about elevating sparks of fallen wisdom, things that have been dropped because of the fact that we chose to, well, we chose to find ourselves doing what? Making our own understanding. We aren't spending the time, or we can't spend the time with divine timing and refinement because we missed it. Now, God tried to give it back to us with the first set of tablets. But if we have to understand something out of that, we have to understand that when we just simply read the 10 commandments out of the book of Exodus, that's not enough. Certainly, it gives us the do's and don'ts for 10 basic steps. But it doesn't teach us what's underneath it, that which is hidden. Our job is to elevate what sparks of wisdom we can. And essentially, history is all about that. It's dealing with the exiles and ultimately with rectification, because you see at the end of time, everything has to be rectified in order to make it divine. Now, the Nahash dislocated our perception of knowledge, making us believe that wisdom is about control and self-definition, when in true wisdom is about an alignment with the divine will. The whole journey of history, it's about Torah study. It's about spiritual refinement. Well, it's undoing the damage that's already been done, transforming that good and evil into true godly understanding and knowledge. Many interpretations suggest that the serpent's deception was an offering, a, what should I say, a form of knowledge that, while it appears to be an elevation towards divine wisdom, was in fact a distortion and a lower level understanding. In Genesis 3:6, we read, and the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight to the eyes. Notice the next part. And the tree was desirable to make one wise. So she took its fruit, she ate, she gave it to her husband with her, and he ate. Now, we won't read of the Nahash after this, but we have to be assured that he will see, or we are going to see him at the end of days. Now, he may not have a physical form. He may be just simply a metaphor that's resolved. Before I go on, I would really like to hear your thoughts on Nahash. Do you see him as a serpent, as a deceiver, or a harbinger of enlightenment, or something in between? Will he return as a serpent? That's the question that nobody has the answers to, but a lot of opinions. Now, the other creature that I was talking about earlier is also found in Genesis, the first chapter. Now, his name is not there. His name we recognize as Leviathan. And then most commentators read it in verse 21 of the first chapter. And they call this creature Gadolim Tananim. Gadol is the word for large or giant. Tananim is this word for this monster, this lizard. Now, some people simply say that the Tananim was a alligator or a crocodile. But we have to understand it's Tananim. Im tells us that this is not a singular monster, but plural. Now, he too is going to be appearing at the end of days, and in a deeply mystical way. Like the serpent, he is tied to themes of wisdom, cosmic restorations, and the transformation of primordial forces. I need to go back to Kabbalah for a minute, but first I want to give you this. 5 different times in the Hebrew Bible, we're going to read about Leviathan. We're going to read about him in Job. In fact, we're going to read about him 3 times in Job. We're going to read about Psalms, twice in Psalms, and we're going to read about him again in Isaiah. Now, each case, the Hebrew word employed is the same. The word is Leviathan. Now, it's pictured by most people today as either being a sea monster, a crocodile, a serpent, a dragon, or some large aquatic, semi-aquatic animal, like a dinosaur. Etymologically speaking, Leviathan means twisting one, which would suggest that an aquatic serpent might be the best description for this creature. Now, I want to go back and I want to read Job chapter 41, and I want to go through some verses there. Verses 12 to 14. What powerful legs, what a stout body this monster possesses, who could strip off its armor or bring it under control with a harness. Who would try to open its jaws, full of fearsome teeth? And when monster sneezes, lightning flashes, and its eyes glow like the dawn. Sparks and fire flames explode from its mouth. The smoke spews from its nose like steam from the steam from a boiling pot. And while it is blazing, breath scorches everything in sight. Now its neck is so tremendous that everyone trembles. The weakest part of its body are harder than iron. And when this noisy monster appears, even the most powerful turn and run in fear. No sword or spear can harm it. No weapons of bronze or iron, they're useless. It's like straw and rotted wood. Rocks thrown from a sling cause it to no more than harm the husks of the grain. This monster fears no arrows. It simply smiles at spears, and striking it with a stick is like slapping it with a straw. It crawls through the mud. Its sharp and spiny hide tears the ground apart. Imagine. Adding to this description, the psalmist will tell us that, well, God says he will crush its head. He will crush its head. Psalms 74, verse 14. So thus we're told that the Leviathan has a head. No, actually we're told that he has multiple heads. which correlates with another language, Ugarit. Ugarit was a language that was spoken in northern Syria along the coastline. And it was there that it was written down, and it says that the Leviathan actually had 7 heads. Imagine that. We have a 7-headed monster. Now, both originally the book of Job probably was written in this ancient cuneiform kind of writing that's now transferred or transposed over into what we now read as modern Hebrew. And the same thing was true with the Ugarit. It also was a pictorial language. So this idea emphasizes, Ugarit, emphasizes the fact that the Hebrew language probably was correct in its understanding. Now we know it's a twisting one, and then the legends would apply that to a dragon or something like a dragon, as well as to a snake. So hopefully, well, it can't be the Nahash, or could it? You have a better idea of what the Leviathan looks like, but what's the message behind the monster? In each of the biblical passages where Leviathan appears, it is used in clear metaphoric language. For example, Job describes the beast's power to contrast it with the declaration that God is king over all. So in Psalms 54 or 74, God will crush its heads. That's destruction. But it's only God who has the ability to destroy it. And if it's correct in Ugarit, he has 7 heads. Imagine that. Now, similarly, in the book of Isaiah, we're told that at the end of days, Leviathan, here it's called the crooked serpent, or it's also known as the dragon that is in the sea, shall be punished and slain. That's in Isaiah 26, 21 to 27:1. Each of these passages uses the mythical beast as the symbol of evil, contrasting it with good and the power which flows from God. Now, the last of the 5 Hebrew Bible chapters or passages in which Leviathan appears is in Psalms 104. In that place, Leviathan is still seen, well, more metaphorically, but in a different way than any of the other passages. Whereas Asaph uses the traditional negative way, that's in an earlier psalm. But King David, who is said to have written this 104th psalm, well, he used to represent one of God's creatures in a psalm that praises God's diversity of creation. And yet, once again, the mysterious creature is a symbol not to be taken literally. Now, many commentators see that this chapter is highlighting God's power, not the creatures. And however, unlike the other passages which focus on God as the creator of order and Leviathan as one who destroys and brings chaos and disorder, Psalms 104, 22 or 26 highlights that all of God has created has a place and a purpose in his divine plan. So what can be the purpose? Now, there's a handful of symbols for which Leviathan is represented in the Bible. When God defeats the beast in chapter 74 of Psalms, the destruction comes in the context of creation. Because it says in 12 to 14, but God is my king from time immemorial, who works salvations in the midst of the earth. You crumbled the sea with your might. You shattered the heads of the sea monsters on the water. You crushed the heads of Leviathan. You give it as food to the people in companies. So Leviathan is associated with chaos, tohu, and more than likely was a symbol of destruction, bringing chaos into the atmosphere, into the cosmos when creation began. Because you remember in the beginning of Genesis chapter 1, we know that the first verse was, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. But immediately we flip the switch and we now talk about tohu vabohu. We talk about chaos. So in the context of creation, this monster is anti-creation, anti-order, anti-cosmos, well, the crushing of Leviathan's head in 74, or the seven heads, depending on how you want to look at it, suggests that God's will, or that God will, destroy all chaos, evil, and opposition at the end of days, probably at the moment he destroys Leviathan. There are also echoes in chapter 74 of Psalms and Isaiah 27 with what goes on in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. Remember, where the author speaks of the crushing of the serpent's head, and well, maybe we should look at that verse. I didn't write it down for you, but it probably would help if you saw it. So I'm going to turn to Genesis chapter 3 for you, and we're going to look at something there in chapter 3, verse 15. It begins by saying, they didn't take it out. I will put enmity between you and the woman. Now, you is actually the serpent, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he will pound your head, and you will bite his heel. So the concept here is the fact that what we're talking about is the crushing of the serpent's head, the crushing of Nahash's serpent, his understudy, which probably tells us a little bit more about Leviathan. So when Job curses the day on which he was born, which is in Job chapter 3, he draws a parallel between his desire to be dead and the darkness of Leviathan, which parallels the darkness and the chaos of death. Well, interesting enough, it is also found, well, actually, it's not. It's not found in all of the translations of Job. You see, a translation doesn't necessarily mean it's word for word accurate. Just as we have more than one version of the Tanakh, there's more than one version of the original story been translated. Now there's a second Zohar. It's called the Tikkun Zohar, which suggests that the final rectification of the Nahash will come when Leviathan is defeated and the wisdom it represented is fully integrated into holiness. So here Moses shows us that the true spiritual wisdom is not given effortlessly, but you have to earn it. You have to refine it. You have to return to God. And little by little, piece by piece, we begin to get a better understanding of Scripture and God. Now, I need to mention in some Kabbalistic traditions, Metatron is actually the scribe who writes this book, because he's the one who keeps track of the book of life. But then when you try to find out what the book of life is, they point you back to the first 5 books of the Bible. So there's an idea that the first tablets really do exist. They weren't destroyed, but actually only metaphorically were destroyed, waiting for the time when humanity will be able to receive them, and again understand the various levels of knowledge within perhaps the Messianic age. We know that right now, scholars will tell you that you read the Bible on 4 different levels. You have what's called the Peshat, the simple level. What it says is what it means. And that's why we think Leviathan was real. That's why we think the serpent was real. But we also have another level. The level just below that is the level of remez. It's the level of hints. What is it hinting at? What is it trying to tell us? Now, the third level, which is even deeper, is called drosh. And from drosh, we also get the word midrash. So in other words, it's the stories underneath the story. But finally, you get to the depth of the thing, the meaning of the words, the values of the words, the values that are hidden in the words, the reorganization of the words. All kinds of things go into what's called sod, the secret level. Sod is also the word that you and I might be more familiar with when we think about basements. A basement is a sod. You see, there's no way to know the basement's there unless you walk around the house and you find the windows leading you from the basement to the light that is outside. So here Moses shows that the spiritual wisdom is not given effortlessly, but it's earned. It causes us to refine ourselves. It causes us to return to God and come repenting. Now, I need to mention that in some Kabbalistic traditions, Metatron, again, he's the scribe that does all of the dealings with the divine wisdom. Now, there's another idea about the first tablets. You see, the first tablets themselves, according to many, actually is divine wisdom. Now, we can't recognize it as divine wisdom because we didn't get divine wisdom when we were born. We got what Adam and Eve were given, Sakal. You see, we have to learn differently. We have to grow into our understanding. Someday, future, messianic era, probably, we will have that new wisdom. Now, I want to go back and say I spent some time talking with you folks last week about the Book of the Covenant. And I wanted to follow up with what I had just told you that last week, that there's no certainty in describing what the Book of the Covenant is about. The only thing we can be certain about is the fact that it's not the same as Torah, but it may simply be a book that covers some of the Torah. In fact, many of the ancient scholars simply think that it was actually a repetition of Exodus chapter 20, verse 19 through 23:33, which again deals with the idea of the laws, the order of things. But many of those laws that are in those three chapters are actually laws that are found historically. In fact, many of them were found in what was an older set of tablets called Hammurabi's laws. They had them long before. But again, it's just simple, practical laws. In sections 1 and 2 of this thing, it's called being human, and in 3 and 4, it's about the property and objects. Now, most of the individual laws are interrelated, moreover, by means of association and a chain of similar understandings and key words. They're going to deal with Hebrew slaves or slavery altogether, bond women with capital punishment and capital offenses, and finally with bodily injuries is just the first section. Second section deals with goring and oxes. The third section deals with pits and oxes. And the fourth section deals with theft and burglary. And it deals with grazing and with burning and with, well, seduction. You see, those laws have commonality across cultures. Now, I want to look at how the tablets relate to Leviathan and its role in the end of days, because there's a connection between the tablets of the covenant and Leviathan in the end of days. And it's deeply, deeply mystical, according to the rabbis. Both are tied to themes of hidden wisdom, cosmic restoration, and transformation of primordial forces. Leviathan described in Job 41 and Isaiah 21 or 27:1, and the midrashic sources that go with those verses should be seen as a more than just a sea monster. It represents a primordial force, a force of chaos, a force that deals with concealing wisdom. In Kabbalah, Leviathan is linked to the first set of tablets, the one that was originally beyond human comprehension. Just like the first tablets, they were too divine for Israel to be able to retain, or for us. Now, the first set of tablets were made out of supernal sapphire stone, just as Leviathan was said to be a creature of heavenly light, hidden beneath the waters. Now, breaking the tablets themselves mirrors tohu, shattering of our cosmos, making everything chaotic. And finally, Leviathan is said to surround the world, much like the first Torah, which existed before the world, before creation. Because if you remember last week, we talked about the fact there were 7 things prior to creation, and one of them was the tablets that sat upon God's lap. Now, this suggests that the first tablets and Leviathan both belong to a lost, pre-fallen reality, one of pure divine wisdom, before it became fragmented. Now, at the end of days, according to the Midrash, and Midrash, it's in Bava Batra 74b, God will prepare a feast for the flesh of Leviathan for the righteous. We will eat the flesh of the Leviathan. Now, it really is more of a profound metaphor for the restoration of divine wisdom that's been hidden since the beginning of time. So just as Moses received the second set of tablets, which still requires human effort to understand, Leviathan remains hidden until the world is spiritually ready. So in the Messianic age, the Leviathan skin will be used to make a tent or a canopy for its righteousness, or for the righteous, a symbol of divine illumination and protection. But if we look at what we're reading in the book of Exodus, we're reading about the making of the tabernacle. It was a canopy. And it's the idea of returning to that canopy, returning to that first set of tablets, that which is hidden from man for right now. Now, speaking of man and hidden, we also have to talk about the light. Certainly, we have the light of sun, moon, and stars, but we lost the original light, the original ganuz, or ganuz. Or is light. Ganuz is the hiddenness of it. In the book of Malachi, the 3rd chapter, verses 19 to 22, we read, "For lo, the sun comes glowing like a furnace, and all the audacious citizens and all the preparatories of wickedness will be stubble, and the sun comes shall burn them with so much heat, and it will leave them neither root nor branch, says the Lord of hosts. And some of the mercy shall rise with healing, the sun, S-U-N, not S-O-N, the Son of mercy shall rise with healing in its wings for you who fear my name. Then will you go forth and be fat as fatted calves." Key, keep in remembrance the teachings of Moses, my servant, the laws and ordinances which I commanded him in Horeb for all Israel. Notice the sun's glow, the hidden light. Thus, Leviathan's feast represents a revelation back to that which was original, undistorted Torah, which will no longer be beyond human capacity. There is an ancient Kabbalistic parallel between Leviathan and Nahash. The Nahash represents fallen knowledge, the illicit attempt to grasp divine wisdom prematurely. That's the eating of the tree of knowledge. Leviathan represents revealed or redeemed knowledge, the same deep secrets that now restored and are available to the righteous. The book of our Bible, the Tanakh, the Torah, begins with the word Bereshit. Bereshit is the word for in the beginning. Now, the first letter is actually a preposition, but it's also its own word. The word here is in. But bet is also a number, and the number is 2. So many times we're going to read about 2 opposites, things going on, things happening. The first set of tablets, they're pure revelation, and they correspond to the primordial Torah before the fall. The second set of tablets speak of wisdom, but it's earned wisdom, and it corresponds to the fallen world, where knowledge is acquired through struggle. The Nahash is an Edenic serpent, and it represents the corruption of the divine wisdom, the first set of tablets being lost. But the Leviathan, found at the end of days, represents the restoration of divine wisdom, the first set of tablets. Now, this suggests that the final redemption is not about rejecting the Nahash, but it's about transforming into the Leviathan, turning the fall of wisdom into the perfected state. Now, according to some Kabbalists, in the Messianic era, humanity will be ready for the first tablets again. But this time it will be different. You see, this time we will also have the Mashiach, and he will be able to go through the Torah in a higher order, beyond the primordial Torah, which is originally hidden by God from mankind after they made their choices. This is where we're going to go. Rather interesting. Kabbalah and Midrash speak of the 2 messiahs, and it figures who played distinctive roles in the cosmic process. Mashiach ben Yosef, well, he's the Messiah, the son of Joseph, the warrior, the one who prepares the way through struggle, through exile, and he's the one who will lead by his words through the second set of tablets. Because you see, he will also be very religious. But the Mashiach ben David, the Messiah, the son of David, he's the final redeemer. He's associated with the restoration of the first tablets, and he is the one who will return us to divine wisdom. So the 2 figures corresponded to 2 tablets. The second tablet to Mashiach ben Yosef, the first one, which is about human effort, while the second one deals with Mashiach ben David, which deals with divine perfection. That's where we're headed at this point in time. In the age of the Mashiach, the Torah of Mashiach will be different from the Torah we study today. It will be a higher Torah, one that's going to transcend duality and limitations. In the Midrash, in Vayikra Rabbah 13:3, you read this statement: a new Torah will go forth in the days of the Mashiach. Now, the Zohar teaches that the first tablets hidden in the supernal realms will be restored, and the secrets of creation, Leviathan, and the hidden names of God, they're all going to be revealed. And this suggests that the Torah of the end days is not new, but it is the original Torah, which was lost. And again, I say, some traditions hold that the original tablets were not completely lost, but were preserved at a higher realm, recorded by the Metatron in his book of life. So the righteous of the end of days will be granted access to all this hidden wisdom. And what's the role of the Metatron in the Messianic days? Then obviously it's going to be revealing what's hidden. So the tablets, Leviathan, the primordial Torah, are going to be restored. The Messianic age is going to be a time when humanity will move back to the level of Adam before his fall. And who will be his redeemer? Who will be his teacher? The Nahash. Because you see, God is going to heal him. Now, the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of life, they're going to merge again. Because if you read Genesis early, you know that the Torah, the tree of life, was in the center of the garden. But it also says the tree of knowledge was at the center of the garden, meaning there will be no longer any separation between divine wisdom and human experience. The Leviathan, once a hidden force of chaos, will now nourish the righteous, signifying the completion of the divine revelation. Cosmic cycle will come to an end. Everything will move forward as God intends it. But God has intended everything to be the way it is right now. Because you see, you and I, in order to be right with the Lord, needed to choose him. And if everything was perfect in the beginning, choice wouldn't be a problem. We just all would. But the choice wasn't always easy, and it still isn't easy. We still have to go through the process of choice. Okay. I've reached the end of my reaching at the end. Talked to you for 47 minutes. Anybody have any questions? I'm sure I was completely accurate and easy for you all to understand. And there's nothing new under the sun. Well, actually, that's what Malachi said.